Greetings, family, royals, nobles, autochthons, Asiatics, Nagas, heirs, and heiresses. Dark Matter here once again with another one. The Reawakening America tour is an infestation of non-American, parasitic, right-wing Donald Skunk supporters. Again, the Reawakening America tour is an infestation of non-American, parasitic, right-wing Donald Skunk supporters. Some of you may have heard of this Reawaken America tour, which was a series of business seminars that took place beginning somewhere around the 24th of September of this year and sponsored by a couple of capitalist non-American scumbags who go by the names Clay Clark, and Robert Zoellner. This Robert Zoellner's last name, as you may already see, is of German descent. And of course, Clay Clark's last name being of English descent. If you would further notice, both of these surnames, Clark and Zoellner, are particularly of Western European descent. Absolutely every time you hear a non-American, pale-skinned foreigner reference the West, whether they are trying to brag about so-called Western civilization or trying to take credit for what they coined as Western achievements, they are specifically highlighting and paying tribute directly to genetically recessive, melanin deficient, Euro-albinoid, non-American peoples of Western European descent who have been parasitically seated here on this Western Hemisphere. In other words, they do not genuinely represent the West. They represent a parasitic invasion and an infestation of the Western Hemisphere in which they are now preying on the true Aboriginal/original peoples of the West, mainly the copper-colored peoples of the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa. These scumbag characters, Clay Clark and Robert Zoellner, are proud to identify themselves as exactly what they are, capitalists, which basically equates to bloodsuckers and predators, as they never provide you with anything but have every goal of gaining something of value. This is the default origin of absolutely all of these foreign, pale-skinned, non-American invaders that are now on American soil, constantly looking for something free, and who are now sucking up the natural resources away from the original/Aboriginal inhabitants of the Americas, and therefore the West. Then these same parasitic, mostly European bloodsuckers have the nerve to claim that they are innocently indulging in free trade on a free market. Okay, I would guess that it is free when you are constantly freely gaining off of something or someone and you never bring anything of value to the table in the first place, or you have never brought anything of value or of substance to the table in the first place. This is their European capitalism, which sounds and operates strikingly similar to cannibalism. This parasitic European concept of capitalizing freely off of someone else somehow became their religion. Faith in the idea that people, specifically with melanin hue pigmentation in their skin, had no knowledge of a divine being, that unnatural, melanin deficient, genetically recessive, pale faced so called white people were inherently intellectually superior, and that the system of capitalism was for the world's own good, served to alleviate the conscience of the foreign, pale skinned, non American so called white person of Western European descent. This religious alleviation of their conscience for the systematic capitalistic blood sucking of peoples around the world, and especially including the Americas, is more familiarly known as Christianity, otherwise known as criminality. This would be the reason why absolutely all of the speakers that are scheduled to speak on this Reawaken America tour are mostly professed to be Christian Trump supporters, as Donald Trump is their idol, which represents pathologically demented Christian capitalism at its finest, where all he does and all he's ever done is rip people off and steal their money, while at the same time deceiving you with the deceptive slogan, Make America Great Again. A lot of you may already know that when Donald Skunk and his father indulged in the many various criminal enterprises in New York, which is where these slime bags made the basis of their wealth, Trump received federal subsidy monies at the New York taxpayers' expense, freely, of course, and used the money to turn around and develop for-profit rental units. And when so-called black and brown people came to apply to rent and live in any of these units, the management of these buildings marked the rental paperwork of so-called black and brown people with a coded letter C for colored, which was then used to discriminate and deny them access to rent strictly based on the color of their skin. Now, the U.S. Justice Department picked up this case and saw evidence to actually bring charges against the Trump crime syndicate, which is his father and his son and his brother, whoever else. And they settled. The Trumps settled. And when you settle, that's an indication of guilt. Okay, they didn't deny any wrongdoing and all of this rental discrimination against so-called black and brown residents in New York. Okay, so Trump is guilty of straight racism. Now, by saying that, I'll say he's guilty of straight bigotry and racism, because racism is kind of a tricky word, but it's still in the same line of bigotry. Now, by saying that, what so-called Negro, black, colored, or African American in North America would support this redneck, racist, bigoted scumbag, Donald Skunk, in a U.S. presidency or any other capitalist venture? It would have to be a hypnotized, brain-damaged Negro who is still stuck in the illusion of inclusion. Anyway, that will be the main topic of this broadcast. The Reawaken America tour, which featured all of these speakers that support Trump and blood-sucking capitalism against the poor and the powerless. Again, this series of speaking events took place around the last week of September of this year, and I think it's actually still going on till around like the middle of this month, October. But first of all, as always, let's get into some news. What's in the news? U.S. debt ceiling, government shutdown fraud should be of concern right now, because what I see once again is massive fraud and extortion. The reason that this whole debt ceiling government shutdown is a fraud is because, number one, they have often presented the same fear tactic on and against the American people for quite some time now. Number two, the bankrupt United States federal corporation democracy is $28 trillion in national debt, and there's not enough vulnerable, gullible U.S. citizens to pay the interest on this $28 trillion. All right, so the $28 trillion is just the principal amount. And when one puts you in debt and the interest on the principal debt amount gets so large until you can never pay the principal, that is called the operation of criminal usury and monetary exploitation. This type of criminal usury and monetary exploitation is the documented trademark of the redneck imposter, fake so-called white Jews / Jew bankers which now has complete control of the regulation of U.S. currency. In the congressional record of the 73rd Congress of 1933, former U.S. Congressman Louis T. McFadden exposed these Jews/Jew bankers and blamed them for the monetary problems of the United States. And of course, he winds up mysteriously murdered. On May 29, 1933, this former U.S. Congressman, Louis T. McFadden, delivered a speech against the Roosevelt administration's currency bill that ended the gold standard. Why was this particular information in history highlighted in North America? This is the current reality of the U.S. currency and debt system. So both the Republicans and Democrats are lying through their filthy teeth. What you are now seeing is the game of charades knowingly being continued to be played on the gullible, vulnerable American people. These people who you are still dumb enough to believe is your government are sick, demented parasites who are clearly doing the bidding of a diabolical foreign interest. Absolutely every U.S. administration, whether Republican or Democrat, number one, had a Jew banker as U.S. Secretary of Treasury. Okay, bear with me while I get my place here. I kind of lost my place. Bear with me. I'll say it again. Absolutely every U.S. administration, whether Republican or Democrat, number one, had a Jew banker as U.S. Secretary of Treasury. Number two, funneled astronomical amounts of U.S. dollars annually to the terrorist, apartheid, Zionist Jew state of Israel. And number three, attended AIPAC meetings to assure that the U.S. would meet the Zionist Jew mandates for the beneficial policy of Israel. Okay, your current U.S. Vice President, Kamala, aka Scamala Harris, is married to the Jew Doug Emhoff, who has been bestowed the title Second Gentleman of the United States. Okay, your U.S. politicians specialize in all this deceptive verbal terminology, such as filibustering and bipartisanship. Bipartisan this and bipartisan that. Okay, it's all theater and deception. American people choose to stay ignorant at their own peril, in which, the American people, aka U.S. citizens, are nothing but bond servants to foreign debt interests. Anyway, what else is in the news? Pandora Papers ties world leaders to secret wealth. Again, Pandora Papers tie world leaders to secret wealth. Most of you by now may or may not have heard of the Pandora Papers, which is a secret trove of files and documents about offshore finance that expose various world leaders. The International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, a Washington, D.C. based network of reporters and media organizations, said that these files, that are now familiarly known as the Pandora Papers, are linked to about 35 current and former national leaders and more than 330 politicians and public officials in 91 countries and territories. Offshore finance for the sake of avoiding hefty corporate taxes by the rich and wealthy around the world is successfully done mainly by creating dummy front shell companies offshore somewhere, in which it's very hard to know who is actually running the company. Basically, all that is revealed is an endless trail of agents of a company, and never the actual principal to hold accountable for any wrongdoing, such as the dodging of taxes. The European Union all of a sudden announced disingenuous intentions to supposedly develop new tax legislation to enhance tax transparency. Yeah, good luck on that one. It's not going to happen. But continuing, continuing. Let me get my place back here. Bear with me. Let me get my place back. Somehow I hit a button and it went all the way down to the end of the page. But okay, where was I? Okay, here we go. Okay, I left off by saying offshore finance, I'll say it again, for the sake of avoiding hefty corporate taxes by the rich and wealthy around the world, is successfully done by mainly creating dummy front shell companies offshore somewhere, in which it's very hard to know who is actually running the company. And I said basically all that you ever see or you have access to is an endless trail of agents of a company, but you never have access to the actual principal of who's running the company to hold accountable for any wrongdoing, such as taxes. Okay. And then the last thing I said was the European Union all of a sudden announced disingenuous intentions to supposedly develop a new tax legislation to enhance so called tax transparency. Now, I will now read to you from an October 3rd article entitled Pandora's Papers: Rich and Powerful Deny Wrongdoing After Dump of Purported Secrets. Again, Pandora Papers, Rich and Powerful Deny Wrongdoing After Dump of Purported Secrets. It says the Czechoslovakia Prime Minister, the King of Jordan, and the chairman of India's biggest conglomerate were all among global figures denying wrongdoing on Monday after the leak of what major news outlets called a secret trove of documents about offshore finance. Okay, let me get my place again. This thing is kind of skipping around on me. These computers are so sensitive if you hit a wrong button. India said it would investigate cases linked to the data dump, known collectively. Damn it, did it again. Bear with me, bear with me. This damn thing keeps jumping. And I'm not even touching anything. Let's see if that does it. Okay, India, continuing with the article. India said it would investigate cases linked to the data dump, known collectively as the Pandora Papers, while Pakistani Finance Minister Shaukat Taran said officials named in the documents would be investigated, including himself. The Kremlin said it had seen no evidence in the leak of hidden wealth among Russian President Vladimir Putin's entourage after the Washington Post said the documents showed Putin's mistress had used offshore funds to buy a flat in Monaco. The dump of more than 11.9 million records, amounting to about 2.94 terabytes of data, was 5 years after the leak known as the Pandora Papers exposed how money was hidden by the wealthy in ways that law enforcement agencies could not detect. Jordan's King Abdullah, a close U.S. ally, was reported to have used offshore accounts to spend more than $100 million on luxury homes in the United Kingdom and the United States. The Washington Post, which is part of the international consortium of investigative journalists, also reported on the case of Savitla Krivanik, a Russian woman who it said became the owner of a Monaco apartment through an offshore company incorporated on the Caribbean island of Tortola in April 2003, just weeks after she gave birth to a girl. At the time, this Russian woman, Svetlana Krivanik, who became the owner of a Monaco apartment through an offshore company incorporated on the Caribbean island, was in a secret, years-long relationship with Putin, the newspaper said. The woman is said to have served as deputy mayor under the Putin regime. In a nutshell, these leaked files, known as the Pandora Papers, confirms to you that the wealthy elite around the world in every country live by a set of different rules than the poor, downtrodden masses that are constantly running on the hamster treadmill or gerbil treadmill, trying to get that carrot in which they will never get. The wealthy global elite, which I refer to as the 1 to 5% global elite, are all in bed together behind the scenes, but they give the illusion that they are at war with each other. This is more smoke and mirrors in which they keep the already dumbed down masses distracted by such devices and mediums as the evening news, Facebook, YouTube, online games, slam dunk contests, twerking contests, etc., etc., etc. Remember, this group of world leaders that are secretly prospering off of these offshore accounts would include absolutely all of your U.S. presidents or former U.S. presidents and current U.S. presidents, such as Donald Skunk, Hillary and Bill Clinton, the filthy Bushes, Joe Biden, etc. For example, the former U.S. President Donald Skunk, out of one side of his crooked capitalist mouth, is deceptively telling the American people of how corrupt the European country Ukraine is. But with the other hand, in 2006, Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump traveled to Ukraine to meet with the government officials about building a multi-million-dollar hotel and golf course in the country. And 2 years later, Trump Jr. was back to actually meet the developers. Then a decade later, Donald Skunk contradicts himself by arguing that it's the son of his political rival Joe Biden, not him, who wanted to benefit from what he referred to as a very corrupt Ukraine. Interestingly enough, the Bidens, by way of Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, did have business interests in Ukraine in the form of Burisma Holdings Ldt, in which U.S. President Joe Biden did use his office to provide support and assistance to strengthen his son's business in Ukraine. Donald Skunk also called out Hillary Clinton in her overseas corruption when he referred to Hillary appropriately as Crooked Hillary. So in order to make a long story short, all of them, whether Republican or Democrat, are bred from the same blood-sucking capitalist cloth, and they both operate for the rich getting richer at the detrimental expense of the American poor, which is only getting poorer. And the states of South Dakota and Delaware, right here in the United Filthy Snakes, have rivaled some of the world's most well-known tax havens, such as in the Caribbean, etc., etc. and is the home of international tax havens for the filthy rich around the world. Okay, so South Dakota and Delaware is the home of international tax havens for the filthy rich around the world, which includes about 35 current and former national leaders and more than 330 politicians and public officials in 91 countries and territories. Delaware is an international tax haven for the filthy rich global elite around the world to avoid paying taxes, which would explain why all the credit card companies and banks are headquartered in Delaware, right here in the United Filthy Snakes. And who was a senator in Delaware for 30 years? Can you say sleazy Joe Biden? Okay, and you all think that this sleazy redneck Joe Biden is all of a sudden going to implement tax legislation for the filthy rich to pay their fair share of corporate taxes after he sat specifically at the helm for 30 years and allowed them to make unlimited amounts of money by way of offshore finance, particularly in Delaware? Y'all better wish again. Y'all smoking something. Y'all either brain damage as hell if you think Slick Joe's gonna do that. Joe Biden, in case y'all didn't know, is an agent of the filthy bankers and monetary gangsters. You got all of these American students right here on American soil with all of this astronomical, unpayable school loan debt to these same filthy bankers. And sleazy Joe Biden only gave these students a measly, insulting $10,000 off of their school loan debt. And when they rose up in the streets to demand $50,000 off their school loan debt, Joe Biden said no can do. Some of the amounts of these school loan debts are equivalent to a mortgage on a home. Okay, this shows that Joe Biden is clearly controlled by the bankers. Joe Biden is supposed to be a Catholic so-called Christian. And what I ask is, where is the Christian year of Jubilee that is mandated by the Bible, which is supposed to completely forgive the people's debt every 7 years? Okay, this shows more Christian hypocrisy by your so-called Christian leaders of the United Snakes, because I have not seen any year of Jubilee debt forgiveness in not one U.S. president, whether Republican or Democrat, including your great Black Hope, supposedly Christian president, U.S. president, former U.S. president Barack Obama. Anyway, what's next in the news? Continuing with the news. Ethiopian American Civic Council petitions the United States to force Eritrea out of Tigray. Again, Ethiopian American Civic Council petitions the United States to force Eritrea out of Tigray. And I'll read a little bit about it. The exact wording of this petition is as follows: To the honorable representatives and senators, on behalf of the Ethiopian American Civic Council across the United States, we would like to thank all the members of the Foreign Relations Committees of the United States Congress who voted for House Resolution 128, supporting respect for human rights and inclusive governance in Ethiopia, and Senate Resolution 168, a resolution supporting respect for human rights and encouraging inclusive governance in Ethiopia. Ethiopian Americans and Ethiopians across the globe have waited expectantly for a long time for the United States Congress to act in the face of the notorious crimes against humanity and corruption of the Ethiopian dictatorship. With your support for these bills, Ethiopia will finally have a chance to become a stable and prosperous democracy. Your concern for the people of Ethiopia will help build a stronger and more effective partner for the United States. The United States in general, and the new Biden administration in particular, have moral and ethical responsibility to stop the ethnic cleansing campaign on Tigray by Eritrea. Now, what I will say, first of all, about this petition is the fact that, number one, petitioning for something and petitioning to someone is equivalent to begging for something and or begging to someone. Supposedly sovereign nations do not beg or petition to another nation for anything. The year is now 2021, and Africa as a whole, or individual African nations in part, are always pathetically begging the United Filthy Snakes for one thing or another. This shows the God that Africa trusts and serves to this very day, and exactly who Africa ultimately idolizes, reveres, and pays respects to. What interest is the United Filthy Snake supposed to have a in an Eritrea Tigray conflict all the way over on the continent of Africa, when the world is now watching the extreme racist brutality against Haitian Americans that are indigenous and aboriginal right here on the American continent? If you ignorant, hypocrite, ass kissing so called Africans would read the historic document known as the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, it will tell you that the U.S. will control for its own interests the entire Western Hemisphere, which obviously includes the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa. And then John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor of the Donald Skunk administration, reaffirmed and reconfirmed the U.S. commitment to the Monroe Doctrine, and then, of course, put sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba right here on this Western Hemisphere. And Africa didn't say a damn thing. Nobody in Africa said nothing. Okay, this means that absolutely everything that the unsanitary snakes, otherwise known by initials U.S., does or does not do in the Americas, the Caribbean, and or Africa will be exclusively in the interests of unnatural, melanin deficient, genetically recessive peoples, particularly of Western European descent, which now makes up the European Euro-Albion Brotherhood, now modernly known as the United States, and more specifically, deceptively referred to as the West. Number two, this ridiculous petition by Ethiopian Americans to the United States has the nerve to say, with your support for these bills, Ethiopia will finally have a chance to become a stable and prosperous democracy. Okay, when exactly did Africa, or the people of Africa, begin feverishly repeating the word democracy for absolutely any of its affairs? This shows a thorough brainwashing. The word democracy is not even an African word or an indigenous word of any brown-skinned ancient peoples anywhere on the natural earth. Now, Africa, as well as countries in the Caribbean and in South America, is pathetically constantly begging for democracy. Okay, this democracy has been seen as a catalyst for colonization and conquest. Okay, democracy is not ancient. It's a relatively modern concept. It is no good. Continuing, Africa is still the colonial puppets of the colonizing United States and has absolutely no influential power to raise up and free so-called Africans in the so-called diaspora from the same colonization in the Americas. Ass-kissing so-called Africans have shamefully adopted the colonizers' Christian religion and have now came to North America to do the colonizers' job of oppressing and incarcerating so-called African Americans. If you would go to any of these many various U.S. jails and U.S. prisons, you will see ass-kissing Africans and coconuts from the Caribbean proud to maintain the modern system of slavery. And they actually consider their role as the colonizer for the pale-skinned so-called white man as a proud Christian duty. Africa is clearly not ready to lead the world when it is still colonized in the mind, as well as colonized in the behind. Bear with me. I'm going to pause right here for a second. Bear with me. Anyway, continuing with the news. Continue with the news. I would guess that most of you already know that October is Hispanic Heritage Month. I will read to you a little bit of what a website has to say about this month. On the website www.hispanicheritagemonth.gov, it says each year Americans observe National Hispanic Heritage Month from September 15th to October 15th by celebrating the histories, cultures, and contributions of American citizens whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. The observation started in 1968 as Hispanic Heritage Week under President Lyndon Johnson and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a 30-day period starting on September 15th and ending on October 15th. It was enacted into law on August 17th, 1988 on the approval of Public Law 100-402. The day of September 15th is significant because it is the anniversary of independence for Latin American countries Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. In addition, Mexico and Chile celebrate their Independence Days on September 16th and September 18th, respectively. Also, Columbus Day, or Dia de la Raza, which is October 12th, falls within this 30-day period. What I will now say is the first paragraph deceptively mentions the combination of words American citizens, whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. America consists of two continents, South and North, an isthmus, and adjoining islands. And this landmass, now contemporarily known as America, has about 35 separate nations with their own national flags, national currencies, national peoples, etc. Therefore, this American landmass does not and cannot have American citizens, but can only have American nationals, such as Cuban American nationals, Peruvian American nationals, Nicaraguan American nationals, Morican American nationals, etc. Even the regional concept of Central America was artificially created somewhere around the year 1823. And previously, Central America was previously known historically as Mesoamerica, which equates to Middle America. One must remind you that the 1828 definition of American says an aboriginal or one of the copper-colored natives found on this continent by the European. This definition says absolutely nothing about Hispanic, Latino, Indian, Puerto Rican, Negro, Black, colored, or African. So Americans are not Spaniards. Hispanics are the Spaniards, the people of Spain. Calling yourself Hispanic denies you of your true American identity, history, and heritage, and enslaves you to the interests of the pale-skinned Spanish so-called white world. Okay, Americans are not Latinos. Latinos are the Latins, Southern Europeans, the Spaniards, the French, and the Portuguese. Calling yourself Latino makes you a cultural slave of Europeans, which is a form of cultural genocide, or cultural suicide, rather. So this particular website that is defining so-called Hispanic heritage is very deceptive and is most definitely using deceptive wordplay. All that one really needs to know about the concoction of the word and identity Hispanic is the fact that it is displayed as an identity on the United States Census questionnaire. If you would go to the U.S. Census website at www.census.gov, and we already told you that the U.S. Census Bureau is ran by the U.S. Department of Commerce, under the section about race, it clearly tells you that the racial categories included in the census questionnaire, and I'll give you some examples: Negro, Black, Colored, African American, Latino, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Indian, etc., generally reflect a social definition of race recognized in this country and not an attempt to define race biologically, anthropologically, or genetically. Now, two things it talks about this country, you already know this country is a corporation. And when it says it reflects a social definition, you're talking socialism, which is another form of communism, where they're lumping everybody all together as one race. So this word and identity concoction known as Hispanic denotes a commercial commodity and not a natural human being person. The United States of America Republic ended, and in year 1871, the United States Federal Commercial Corporation was constructed, which resulted in any peoples such as so-called Hispanics interacting with this newly established U.S. commercial corporation would have to be in some sort of commercial corporate capacity. In a nutshell, the United States is now commercially playing the so-called Hispanics against the so-called blacks, and the so-called blacks against the so-called Latinos, and the so-called Indians against the so-called blacks, and so forth and so on, with the so-called blacks now being at the bottom of the pecking order. It was Dr. Claude Anderson that warned so-called blacks about the dreadful economic condition that they were going to be in when the so-called Latinos, so-called Hispanics, Asians, and Indians, etc., are strategically economically placed against them and on top of them in America, which Claude Anderson basically said that so-called blacks are headed toward being a permanent underclass. We all can see that dreadful dilemma taking place right before our eyes here in the late year of 2021. I personally went to an Hispanic Heritage Month event last week, and I can tell you that they are here to exert political power over the so-called blacks, even though they come from us genetically. They all got Moreno in them, but they are being massively brought to North America to be in a strategic economic position against Morenos in which they come from. And remember, most of them are Catholic Christians to be used as a voting base to keep the gringo in power as long as he gives them a sense of power. Anyway, I will do one last news article before I get into the main topic. Biden is the first president to mark Indigenous Peoples Day. This is a www.yahoo.com article. Now, this title alone, I'll say it again, Biden is the first president to mark Indigenous Peoples Day. This title alone should make you want to vomit. Biden now somehow miraculously gives a damn about Indigenous people. I will read just the introduction of this article to let you see just how insulting it is. It says President Joe Biden on Friday issued the first ever presidential proclamation of Indigenous Peoples Day, lending the most significant boost yet to efforts to refocus the federal holiday celebrating Christopher Columbus toward an appreciation of Native peoples. The day will be observed October 11th, along with Columbus Day, which is established by Congress. Now, what I have to say about this proclamation is what the protesters just recently shouted at Joe Biden when he came to town. Fuck you, Joe Biden. That's what I say. Just so you all can be perfectly clear of systematic, pathologically sick, contradictive behavior patterns of this redneck sleazebag Joe Biden. This bullshit U.S. presidential proclamation on Indigenous Peoples Day, on one hand, is supposed to lend a boost for an effort to refocus Columbus Day toward an appreciation of Native peoples, in which this Indigenous Peoples Day will be celebrated on October 11th, the same day as Columbus Day. But on the other hand, sleazy Joe Biden, in a separate additional proclamation specifically for Columbus Day, praised the role of Italian Americans in U.S. society. Is this not a blatantly sick contradiction? One should immediately ask, what role did so-called Italian Americans play in so-called U.S. society that is worthy of praise? The filthy racist European Italians, along with the English, the Irish, the Scottish, the French, and the Germans, served as the colonizers of America and colonizers of the copper-colored peoples of America. Absolutely anytime you hear of an Italian so-called explorer or navigator, always on what they deceptively refer to as expedition, such as the pale-skinned Italian parasite Amerigo Vespucci, they came to help exploit and exterminate the indigenous aboriginals and other copper-colored natives found on this continent by the Europeans. Once again, I will echo and reemphasize what the protesters just recently shouted when Redneck Biden came to town. Fuck you, Joe Biden. So that will now end the news portion of this broadcast. I will now get into the main topic. The Reawaken America tour is an infestation of non-American, parasitic right-wing Donald Skunk supporters. Again, the main topic of this broadcast is entitled The Reawaken America tour is an infestation of non-American, parasitic right-wing Donald Skunk supporters. Now, I have already briefly mentioned at the very beginning of this broadcast about the Reawaken America tour, which was a series of business seminars that took place beginning somewhere around the 24th of September of this year. And again, it's probably still going on. For more on this event, you may go to the website thrivetimeshow.com/reawaken-america-tour/ to learn more about the founders of this event, as well as the lineup of the many various speakers. The two non-American capitalist scumbags, Clay Clark and Robert Zoellner, that founded this particular Reawakening American event, as well as all or mostly all of the speakers at this event, identifies themselves as right-wing. The politically motivated combination of words right-wing, in a nutshell, means operating in favor of the Christian religion by way of a people who most likely profess the Christian religion. You hear a lot of redneck Republicans and Southern Baptist redneck preachers who support the redneck Republicans use this term right wing quite frequently when talking U.S. policy and the formulation of U.S. policy. Some of the people that are known to be associated with the identity right wing would be so-called Christian con artists such as Pat Robertson, Billy Scam, or shall I say Billy Sham, in other words, Billy Graham, Pat Buchanan, Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, Jeff Sessions, Steve Bannon, the filthy Bush family, father and son, Donald Trump, etc., etc., etc. And we all heard of the non-American redneck white nationalist terrorist hate group known as alt-right, which has already openly shed the blood and murdered melanin-rich people in America with very little or no oversight. Interesting enough, if there is a right wing suggesting a Christian right, then there must be a left wing suggesting a non-Christian left. This type of Ku Klux Klan type of thinking has absolutely no merits or validity on American soil and is foreign and adversarial to the supreme law of the land, which is none other than the Constitution for the United States of America. Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States of America clearly says, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Again, Article 6 of the Constitution for the United States of America clearly says no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. If we, the natural people who are actually the sovereigns of the United States of America, a republican form of government, placed a clause in the Constitution specifically that no religious tests or no religious affiliation shall ever be required for anything, then no one needs to know, nor does anyone need to care whether you personally identify with the Buddhist religion, Islamic religion, Judaic religion, Christian religion, etc., 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 here on American soil. Religion was clearly not part of the ancient laws which were essentially used in the formation of the United States of America Republic. In order to prove, confirm, and reiterate the fact of the exclusion of the Christian religion having to do with formulating of the United States of America government, in the 1797 Peace and Friendship Treaty between the United States of America and the Bey and subjects of Tripoli of Barbary, so-called founding father and USA President John Adams specifically stated, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, which is Muslims, and as the said states never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. Okay, now this is a founding father saying this, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. Okay? Any sense. All right? And at the end, it says it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. Talking about the U.S. and Tripoli. Okay? As well as Morocco, as well as Algiers, as well as Tunis. All right? So, why are the people of America constantly being manipulated and psychologically bullied into thinking or believing that they need tricked out Christianity for absolutely anything? The pseudo religion known as Christianity being nothing more than the creed of the Roman Emperor Constantine. And equally, the word God does not appear not one time absolutely anywhere in the Constitution for the United States of America. The Christian concocted spook word An imaginary ghost-like character known as God is nothing but a transliteration etymologically from the German word gut, G-H-U-T, which was originally a verb meaning to invoke or to call upon, but now has been conveniently diabolically turned into the deceptive word known as God. And now the part of speech is a noun, suggesting that this concoction is now somehow real. This is sorcery, voodoo, and superstition, because as in the words of the famous Stevie Wonder song, specifically entitled Superstition, when you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. Okay, the present day U.S. so-called Negroes, blacks, coloreds, African Americans have been suffering like hell ever since, and are too cowardly and too brainwashed to let that superstitious Christian bullshit go. Let me give you some of the Christian charlatan speakers and a little bit about what they stand for that were scheduled to speak at the series of seminars entitled Reawakening America Tour. And if you will notice, a good number of them are 501c3, state-run, state-controlled Christian leeches, so-called preachers. What I will say about that is, how are you supposed to be a true man or true woman of God, of so-called God, and at the same time you have signed a non-profit, tax-exempt business deal or business contract with a foreign established, unlawful, de facto, unconstitutional state corporation, which overthrew and replaced the original state republics that were set up here in America? This is just how pathologically sick and psychotically demented that these characters are, especially to be siding with and supporting the Skunk Man, former U.S. President / CEO Donald J. Skunk. Anyway, a partial list is as follows. First on the list, tricked out house negress Melissa Tate. This sister already shows signs of being whitewashed and brainwashed with the straight high yellow orangutan monkey hair in her head. Okay, this Melissa Tate has a book out entitled Choice Privilege, and it says that this book follows author Melissa Tate's early life growing up in Africa and eventual migration to the United States. Tate contends that in America it is a person's good choices, not their skin color, that determines the upward trajectory of his or her life. After migrating to the United States at age 19 for college, her experience in America has been a living contradiction to the false white privilege narrative. In spite of being black in America, Tate has been able to achieve great success, to which she credits to hard work, determination, good choices, and her faith in God. Her story, like many African immigrants, is at odds with propaganda peddled by the left. Okay, so here you have once again an ass-kissing African who obviously adopted Christianity and could not wait to run her mixed-up ass to the Americas to sell her soul and become somebody's tricked out trick. Then she mentions God, G-O-D, God, okay, and the left. Okay, she definitely did not learn this terminology anywhere in Africa. God was not mentioned in Africa, and this concept of the left is definitely not mentioned in ancient Africa. So, she's been assimilated. But anyway, next on the list, Pastor Leon Benjamin. Pastor Leon Benjamin. It says House Negro Leon Benjamin is the senior pastor and bishop of New Life Harvest Church in Richmond, VA. Bishop Benjamin, a former Democrat, and Gulf War veteran, is an emerging evangelical leader on the national front as a media spokesperson and conservative political activist. He operated as a surrogate for Donald Skunk on the presidential campaign trail and worked on the faith based initiative support team during the president elect's transition to the White House. What I'll say is that biography there on this nigga is self explanatory and needs no further explanation. Next up, Mike Lindell. Mike Lindell is a right wing political activist and a close ally of former President Donald Skunk. Has emerged as one of the most vocal boosters still pushing false claims about the 2020 election. In a series of so called documentaries, Lindell has advanced an increasingly outlandish theory that foreign hackers broke into the computer systems of election offices like Clark County to switch votes, and what he has described as the biggest cybercrime in world history. Next on the list, Michael Flynn. Former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who had twice pleaded guilty to lying to FBI investigators, saw the charges against him dismissed. Okay, next on the list, Pastor Mark Burns. House Negro John Mark Burns is an evangelical minister, televangelist, and political candidate who is the pastor of the Harvest Praise and Worship Center in South Carolina. He was an early supporter of Donald Skunk during the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Next up, Roger Stone. I know everybody heard of Roger Stone. Roger Jason Stone is a conservative political consultant and lobbyist. Since the 1970s, Stone has worked on the campaigns of Republican right-wing politicians, including Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Jack Kemp, Bob Dole, George Bush, and of course, Donald Skunk. Well, that is all the names that I'm going to name from that list. You all can see the full list if you desire by going to the website that I mentioned earlier. I proved my point. You see their position. You see their position. But I'm going to begin to wrap up this particular broadcast. All I can truly say is natural, melanin-rich, genetically dominant Asiatics in North America are in real trouble right now and are continuing to perish for countless years of lack of knowledge. Now, let me kick some much needed knowledge to the U.S. so called Negroes, Black, Colored, African Americans to try to put you on a track to some sort of upward mobility so you can know exactly what is going on and the exact game that is being played right now. In a September 29th, 2021 article entitled House Passes Debt Ceiling Suspension That is Doomed in the Senate, the U.S. House of Cards, which is a crooked card dealer in the crooked casino game operation, is once again extorting and frauding the U.S. sheeple people citizens with another bogus debt ceiling diversionary manufactured crisis. The article says the House on Wednesday passed a bill to suspend the U.S. debt ceiling as the country barrels toward a first ever default with no clear solution in sight. Republicans will sink the plan in the Senate. The GOP has opposed any effort to raise the borrowing limit and appears intent on making Democrats address it as part of their sprawling investment in social programs and climate policy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has told lawmakers the U.S. will run out of ways to pay its bills around October 18th. If Congress fails to suspend or raise the debt limit before the deadline, lawmakers risk a default that could cost millions of jobs, jeopardize government benefits, and crash the financial markets. That's the end of that article. That's all I'm going to read. But understand this: the present U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, is a Jew. The former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Steve T. Mnuchin, is a Jew. Was a Jew. Is a Jew. Um, Lost my place again. Bear with me. Bear with me while I find my place. So, again, where I left off at is just reminding you all that the present U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, is a Jew/Jew banker. Former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Steve T. Mnuchin, is a Jew/Jew banker. Former Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, is a Jew/Jew banker. Doug Emhoff, husband of current U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, is a Jew/Jew banker. And what I ask you is, do you see the pattern of Jews/Jew bankers, especially in the regulation and control of U.S. currency? Okay, U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer is a Jew/Jew banker. Okay, it was Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, who introduced a motion that would allow the Senate to hike the bogus debt ceiling. The bankrupt United States federal corporation democracy is $28 trillion in national debt, and there's not enough vulnerable, gullible U.S. citizens to pay the interest on it. Absolutely 100% of the taxes collected from the U.S. sheeple people citizens goes to paying only the interest on the national debt. Not one dime of taxes from U.S. citizens goes to roads, schools, bridges, and other things that people would expect from the government. This fact was proven by former United States President/CEO Ronald Reagan in 1984 with the Grace Commission report, which conducted a study on the waste and inefficiency in the U.S. federal government. So, if your current illegitimate de facto U.S. municipal corporation government is not making money from the collection of taxes, then how exactly is it making money? Otherwise referred to as revenue. You break the word revenue down, it is clearly revenue, as in to be tried in a different court venue. Okay, the word revenue would explain why there is now an internal revenue or revenue service. Someone has clearly been revenued. I wonder who. It ain't hard to tell. Remember, in 1871, an unconstitutional foreign established United States municipal corporation federal government was formed strictly for the District of Columbia, as opposed to the original 1789 United States of America Republican form of government, which was strictly formed by the people, shall I say, by the natural people, for the natural people on the natural land of the continental United States. Municipal corporations, which are dead corpses set up for municipal purposes, need debt and debt instruments, such as municipal bonds, to survive and thrive off of, no different than a vampire needing blood. Absolutely all dead corporations by default are insolvent, aka bankrupt. This new foreign established United States municipal corporation federal government, unlawfully created February 21st, 1871, deals strictly in negotiable banking instruments, which are municipal bonds, as opposed to the original de jure Constitution of the United States of America government, which dealt in substance backed money, aka gold and silver, as mandated specifically in the Constitution for the United States of America Republic and all treaties made. Negotiable banking instruments such as bonds, fiat paper, promissory notes, checks, bill of exchanges, court charges, speeding tickets, mortgages, all types of commercial paper, etc., are controlled by none other than the Jew bankers. This brings us directly to the U.S. prison and U.S. jail system, modern day slavery, that is funding America. Absolutely all of the charges in every U.S. court case. Let me say that again. Absolutely all of the charges in every U.S. court case. Bonds, which are evidence of a debt, are being issued and are being placed in a municipal fund. Absolutely every U.S. court case, whether state or federal court, is traded, otherwise known as negotiated, on the stock market. Remember, there is no more real money of substance to pay for anything after the Jew bankers stole the American people's gold, which is lawful money, in 1933, and left them only with slips of paper, inflatable Federal Reserve monopoly game fiat notes to play with. Corporate debt by way of municipal bonds is how they are funding your bankrupt foreign established municipal federal corporation U.S. government. They want debt. They need debt. This is why they are constantly frauding and extorting the gullible, vulnerable U.S. citizens out of revenue by constantly fabricating a manufactured crisis of a government shutdown so they can raise the debt ceiling, which is exactly what the Democrat Senator Jew Chuck Schumer and Democrat Jew puppet Nancy Pelosi just did for the 2021 bogus government shutdown threat and premeditated public scare and premeditated fear tactic. U.S. prisons and U.S. jails, modern day human trafficking are funding America. When former U.S. President CEO Barack Obama in 2016 visited the El Reno prison outside Oklahoma City, he looked into a 9 by 10-foot prison cell that can house up to 3 inmates at a time, which means that he witnessed that the cell was equipped with a triple bunk bed to inhumanely stack 3 inmates on top of each other at one time. This is appropriately known as warehousing. Barack Obama furthermore confirmed that most of these inmates are disproportionately so-called black, brown, Latino, etc. Basically people with melanin hue pigmentation in their skin. Barack Obama was truthful when he noted that the U.S. prison population has quadrupled since 1980, but Barack Obama was not truthful when he said keeping more than 2 million Americans behind bars is costing taxpayers some $80 billion a year. The truth is, taxpayers are not funding all of this over incarceration of so-called black and brown peoples within U.S. jails and U.S. prisons in America. Bonds, which are evidence of debt, which suggests bond age or age of bondage, otherwise known as modern day slavery, are funding these incarcerations within U.S. jails and U.S. prisons. So municipal bonds are funding these jails, prisons. U.S. prisons and U.S. jails are nothing but human warehouses for the storage of goods and chattel, human cattle, under commercial law, in which the warden of these facilities is designated as the warehouseman who receives personal property from another. This is why another word for inmate is ward, in which a ward is a minor or incapacitated adult placed under the protection of a guardian, such as a warden in a prison, or if a governmental entity, such as a court, then you'll have a ward in the court, a ward of the court. General Services Administration, GSA, and General Accounting Office, GAO, are heavily involved in the accounting aspect of the U.S. prison system, which explains why they are supplying all the bond forms for the prison operation to be successful, which would be the bid bond, performance bond, and payment bond. All this is going on in court. Every time you see a brother getting railroaded, bonds are moving, commercial paper is moving. That's all it is. The facade is that the brother did absolutely anything wrong, especially R. Kelly. Even R. Kelly, it's a commercial matter. Okay, it's not even about them young girls at all. Okay, it's a commercial matter. They about to make money. Commercial paper. They're creating commercial paper out of that case on R. Kelly. Okay, all crimes are commercial. Y'all do your research. Anyway, the rise of public-private partnerships, which is a merger between government and business, also known as fascism, has contributed to the successful operation of these many various U.S. jails and U.S. prisons now on North American soil. Furthermore, there was the move towards a global stock exchange, the establishment of a world's customs organization, and basically open skies between countries. In other words, U.S. citizens, otherwise known as inmates, are nothing but human livestock, chattel and cattle, which are being traded globally on world markets. And why was privatizing prisons so appealing to the federal, state, and local governments? The selling point by U.S. politicians, which I call politricians, to the gullible, vulnerable U.S. citizens was simple. Private companies could build and run prisons cheaper than the governments. Unrestrained American capitalism would produce a better outcome, saving cash-strapped states millions of dollars each year while simultaneously generating huge profits. Private prisons received a guaranteed per diem fee for each prisoner, estimated at $40,000 per year for state prisoners and about $70,000 a year for federal prisons, regardless of the actual costs. Each dime that these private prisons don't spend on food or medical care for prisoners or on wages and training for the prison guards, it is a dime that these private prisons can pocket for themselves. And that is exactly what these prisons are doing, cutting services to prisoners so the private prison corporations can make more profit. If you refer to the 1973 movie classic Soylent Green, starring Charlton Heston, this movie shows of the poor people in society being reduced to canned tuna or some type of edible substance that was canned and actually being eaten and consumed by the rich and wealthy. Well, this is exactly what the privately run U.S. jail and U.S. prison industry is doing to so-called black and brown and poor so-called whites in North America. The rich and wealthy are basically eating the poor like cannibals. Now, what I will now ask you is, did Redneck Joe Biden reveal any of this above mentioned information to you? How about Redneck former U.S. President Donald Skunk? Or your other former president, the great Black Hope, Barack Obama? How about any of these sorry ass house Negro pastors and Christian leechers, so-called preachers of any of these mega churches? Did they tell you about any of this information? How about any of the the slimy scumbag speakers at this recent Reawakening tour, Reawakening America tour event? Are they mentioning any of this to you? Then what? I mean, what are they speaking about? All these speakers look like about 70 speakers total at these events. What are they talking about? Unless they're bullshitting you. So if these unnatural, lice-infested, flea-bitten, rabid animal non-American rednecks can now openly express themselves by coming out and saying that Joe Biden is not their president, then the natural melanin-rich, true American blood right heirs and heiresses can and should come straight out and acknowledge that the United States is not their country or government, okay, which is the absolute unrefutable truth. So I don't know, if this, I don't know if you all know, but this is what's going on in America right now. Okay, redneck so-called white people are hollering out that Joe Biden's not their government. I mean, not their president. Okay, well, he's not my president either. And furthermore, the United States, or United Snakes, United 50 Snakes, is not my country or my government. So continuing before we close out, where is the national government for the current many countless natural melanin rich genetically dominant Asiatic / Africoid aboriginals in North America who are now erroneously presently known and referred to as U.S. so-called Negroes, Blacks, Coloreds, and African Americans? Where's their government? They had one in ancient times. Okay, the present day U.S. so-called Negroes, Blacks, Coloreds, and African Americans, due to a long and continuous war, have been culturally / spiritually / economically severed from the land, and now perpetually exist as another foreign establishment's labor, in which human labor is a highly valuable, priceless commodity. This means, furthermore, that this same group of war victim people are now stateless, meaning no true government structure, descentless, with no verifiable descent, and are non descendables, meaning they do not descend from any known ancestors. Nationality and status is the order of the day. United States citizenship is clearly not a nationality and is not a favorable status. United States citizenship is strictly a commercial construct in which one can only be associated with by knowingly or unknowingly being attached to a commercial contract by way of commercial paper or a commercial item, such as a state birth certificate, social security application, voter registration, welfare or grant assistance, marriage license, fishing license or permit, etc., etc., etc. Can't forget driver's license, in which these are all bondable / monetizable commercial debt instruments that are placed for value on the New York Stock Exchange and other international markets for the purposes of debt collection. Natural Asiatic, genetically dominant melanin-rich peoples in America, the present-day U.S. so-called Negroes, Coloreds, Blacks, and African Americans, are being held as commercial / corporate hostages and are under commercial / corporate siege by the totalitarian, authoritarian, pirate operation known as the United States Federal Corporation Democracy, which was unconstitutionally, unlawfully, and foreignly established on February 21st, 1871. In conclusion of this overall broadcast, I will now give you a couple of YouTube channels which I have recently ran across and which I think is quite informative. The first channel is American Original Sun, SUN. brother who goes by the name of Chief Kalinago. And the other channel is called Blackbeard Mirage. Blackbeard Mirage. Mirage is Miraj. Of course, I don't have to agree with everything that these channels say, but I found a lot of pertinent history and facts in the information on these channels. I did find one horrible YouTube channel called Humans Audacity, of what looks like an African trying to talk shit about the Moors. What I say is, do not let any of these shitty ass Africans come to this American landmass and try to teach you history about the Americas and attempt to tell you what the Moors did to enslave anyone, when they are now one of the biggest colonizers and enslavers of so-called blacks here in America today. Okay, these shitty Africans have treasonously and traitorously adopted Christianity away from their ancient traditions and spiritual practices, and have ran to the Americas to be the pale-skinned so-called white man's new nigger. Okay, once again, if you go and look into any U.S. jail or U.S. prison, it is these ass-kissing Africans that are proud to be locking up so-called blacks / African Americans and trying to get them on state medication. These are truly some evil people, these Africans. Not limited to them, but definitely them. Africans are not in the Americas on any type of solidarity with so-called blacks or so-called African Americans. Okay, they ride around in the Americas with their Christian Sunday school vans, pick up only people of the fucked up African race, just like them. These Africans are not to be trusted unless they show me something otherwise. So, anyway, Dark Matter once again signing off. I hope you learned something from this broadcast. But you all better record this material if you like it, because YouTube will definitely delete it, as they are on a rampage to delete anything and everything they can that speaks unconditional truth. But remember these words: no matter where you go, there you are. I'm out. Peace.